Let's go ahead and do another example. Let's show that cosine t over 1 plus sine t is secant t minus tangent t. All right, so what are we going to do here? Well, I look at the left-hand side and the right-hand side, and with the right-hand side, it seems like I could apply some reciprocal identities and get some common denominators at some point, maybe. So perhaps I'll go ahead and try working with the right-hand side. Okay, so the right-hand side is secant t minus tan t, so that's 1 over cosine t minus sine t over cosine t. So we have our reciprocal identity. And now these already have a common denominator, so this is 1 minus sine t over cosine t. So that's just an easy algebra step. I guess you could put combining fractions if you wanted. And now, how am I going to get this to look like cosine t over 1 plus sine t? It doesn't seem to me that there's anything in our toolbox that will help out here. Get a common denominator factor, cancel, dividing fractions, difference of squares. However, there's a little trick that I want to show you that we'll go ahead and add to the toolbox, and that is when you have 1 minus sine t or 1 plus sine t or 1 minus cosine t or 1 plus cosine t, you can multiply the numerator and denominator by something, and sometimes that has the effect that you need. What do you multiply the numerator and denominator by? Well, you multiply it by, if you have 1 minus sine t, you're going to multiply it by 1 plus sine t, divided by 1 plus sine t. And the reason is because if you FOIL 1 minus sine t times 1 plus sine t, you get, well, 1 squared is 1, minus sine t plus sine t, those will cancel, and then minus minus sine squared divided by cosine t times 1 plus sine t. So let's go ahead and see what happens before I go ahead and add this to our toolbox here. 1 minus sine squared t. Well, what is that? Well, we know that cosine squared t plus sine squared t is 1. So 1 minus sine squared t is cosine squared t. Let's actually go ahead and continue this on a new page. So the numerator is cosine squared t divided by cosine t 1 plus sine t. And so this was Pythagorean identity. And now cosine squared t divided by cosine t, that's just cosine t. So this is cosine t over 1 plus sine t. And, well, that is the left-hand side. So that's the left-hand side, and we're done. I suppose we could call this step canceling common factors. Because what we did is we took one copy of cosine and canceled it with the copy of cosine in the denominator. So let's go ahead and talk about that step that we used, this little trick of multiplying by 1 plus sine t over 1 plus sine t. So you can do this when you have something that looks like 1 minus cosine t, 1 plus cosine t, 1 minus sine t, and 1 plus sine t, either in the numerator and denominator. And then you can go ahead and multiply by just write exactly what's there, but change the sign in the middle. And what that's going to do every time is you're going to be able to change the type of trigonometric function that's there into the other trigonometric function. So in this case, we can change cosine to sine, because what will happen is you'll get 1 minus cosine squared t divided by 1 plus cosine t. And so this will be sine squared t by the Pythagorean identity. So if you wanted to change, if you had 1 plus cosine t floating around in your problem, you could multiply that by 1 minus cosine t over 1 minus cosine t. If you have 1 minus sine t, you can multiply that by 1 plus sine t over 1 plus sine t. And if you have 1 plus sine t, you can multiply by 1 minus cosine, or excuse me, 1 minus sine t over 1 minus sine t. So let's go ahead and add that to our toolbox. Let's go ahead and call it multiplying by something special. Something special. Now that we know how to do that, we can actually tackle this problem in a different way. So let's go ahead, copy it. And now I'm going to go ahead and start with the left-hand side, which is cosine t over 1 plus sine t. And I see this 1 plus sine t in the denominator. I'm going to go ahead and multiply by 1 minus sine t over 1 minus sine t. All right, so this is multiplying by something special. I guess usually I put what I did with the result. So let's go ahead and move this down. And so what would this be? This would be cosine t times 1 minus sine t divided by 1 minus sine squared t. And now in the denominator, I can use the Pythagorean identity. I get cosine t times 1 minus sine t divided by cosine squared t. This would be Pythagorean. And I can cancel one copy of cosine, and I get 1 minus sine t over cosine t. So that's just algebra. And I think I'll just go ahead and finish on this line and say what the steps are. So now you have this fraction here, and where am I trying to get to? I'm trying to get to this, so I think what I'll do is I'll split up this fraction. So this would be 1 over cosine t minus sine t over cosine t. So for this step, that would just be fraction addition. And finally, this would be secant t minus sine t over cosine t is tan t, which is the right-hand side. All right, so there's a couple different ways to do the same problem.